Welcome everyone. We have a very interesting video for you today. We have Lorenzo, a senior manager at Strategy and in London. Welcome.
Thank you.
And together we're going to react to certain comments we've seen on consulting on Fishbowl. Let's get started. All right, let's get started with the first comment. This guy is an intern at McKinsey and he's been on the bench for a couple of weeks. And he's asking if he should be worried about getting a return offer. When I first started my internship at Carney, I was lucky enough to be staffed at a very high impactful project, and I believe I performed well, and as a result, I was able to get my return offer. So yes, it will be important for you to showcase your skills, but also remember that it is also the consulting company's job to give you the projects for you to work on. So you can't do much as an intern. And I remember, especially during COVID times, many consulting companies decided not to give an internship opportunity to some of my trainee cohort at INSEAD. But instead, what happened was that those trainees of mine did end up getting the full-time offer as opposed to internship offer, because they didn't have the chance to do that. In a nutshell, I think it's a great question, but remember that it is the consulting company's job to find you the opportunity to showcase your skills. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I agree with what you said, but I would add that I think it is important to be as proactive as you can possibly be to try and get the opportunities that will allow you to demonstrate your skills. That means reaching out to HR, reaching out to your career coaches to try and make sure that you are getting the right opportunities. And at least it sort of evidences that you have given it all you possibly can to try and get involved with projects. And I think another interesting or sort of different thing that can be done is if you're not able to get on a project, at least try and get onto structured pieces of business development. So sometimes what we do is slightly longer, more structured pieces of business development, which might be a week or two, where you might be essentially doing a mini project. And so actually it does give consultants or interns the opportunity to test their skills much like they would on a normal project.
I agree. All right, let's move on to the second question. Hey guys, I'm joining a management consulting firm soon. Do you have any career advices, things you have picked up along the way, things to look out for that are not so obvious as you start? That's a great question. In fact, we recorded and shared on our YouTube channel a video about what you should do within the first 100 days as you join consulting so that you don't do the mistakes that I did. And just to give you a bit of a glimpse of that video, there are 4 key things you should think about. So these are slide writing, accounting and finance, quantitative tools, and performance evaluation forms. So let me just go through it one by one. So in terms of the slide writing, you don't need to wait until you start your journey at MBB. You can still go over their websites. Usually there are white papers where you can find some examples of the slides that they use. So my suggestion is to go through those slides a little bit, really just try to understand the layout that they use, the language that they adopt. That could be quite helpful. The second thing is around finance literacy. So on this point, I kind of learned it on the job, how to do modeling and how to read a P&L statement. But if you can, just go over different YouTube channels or some industry reports or the company reports that those big companies have, and just walk yourself through what are the key P&L items. It will really help you understand what revenue is, what gross margin is, how different it is compared to EBITDA margin, and so on. This will be quite helpful for you. The third point is more around the quantitative tools. As I was at BCG, especially around 2017 and 18, there was a global push around Alteryx and Tableau. And I'm pretty sure right now, everyone is required to know these. Those companies have free trials. You can actually enroll to their free trials and then you can get those softwares for a couple of weeks. And there are also a lot of training materials out there on YouTube and so on. So my suggestion is go through those a bit so that you don't feel that it is the first time you're seeing as you join MBB. The fourth is going to be more around understanding how your performance will be evaluated. I often see that new joiners usually don't even know how their performance will be evaluated as they join the firm. So what you can do is you can go through our YouTube videos or just simply Google what are the things that MBBs are looking for so that you know what kind of skills you need to develop even before you join them. For example, as you join the firm, you will be evaluated on your interpersonal skills, your communication skills, whether it's verbal or written. So for example, if you don't know how to write a professional email, just go over YouTube and find some videos related to that. So you may want to spend a couple of weeks doing those things. What is your thinking on that?
To add to that, so you've talked about some of the harder skills and softer skills, but I would think also just beyond that, there's also building a name for yourself in the business. So I think of it in sort of two main ways. So one is making sure that you are developing good, positive relationships with peers and managers. You want to make sure that you are top of mind when a new project comes around and that a manager will want to work with you. So anything you can do to sort of build that relationship would be good. And then secondly is to try and get involved in more extracurricular type of activities for the firm. So these might be getting involved with the onboarding team or the recruiting team, social committees, for example. I always find that it's a good way of, first of all, meeting more people around the business and again, building those relationships that I mentioned. But also it tends to bring the best out of people, and you tend to find the top performers are the ones that get involved in a number of different activities, and it really helps strengthen their skills.
All right, let's move on to the next question. How do I get into the mindset of being willing to work my butt off, even if the job isn't always intellectually challenging? I really like this question, so let me get started. So first of all, yes, you need to know that it's not going to be always intellectually challenging. You're not going to solve CEO's most important problems every single day. And also remember, somebody has to do this kind of work. For example, I remember at BCG, that was a project where I also had to collect some price points from one of my slides, and I remember going into different grocery stores, and I knew that you can't just get in and take notes of the price points. So what I would do was that I would pretend as if I'm on the phone with my mom, and I would actually voice record myself so that I could go back to the office and write price points down. I wouldn't mind, because it's not like you're gonna always do the same mundane tasks every day. It's more like, yes, things can get less intellectually stimulating, but actually every day you're gonna be doing something a little different. I even remember sometimes they would fly me off to another city just to collect those price points. Again, I was collecting price points, but this time the method was a little different, so I really wouldn't mind doing those things. But in any case, there are still a couple of things that you could do. So first of all, you just need to remind yourself that you would be only doing these kind of things only within the first couple of years of you joining consulting. I would say that as you progress further as a consultant or a project leader, you can delegate this kind of work. So you don't need to worry too much about it as you progress in your career. The other thing about delegation is that, especially at BCG, I remember that we would have teams located in India or Indonesia, in other countries, where we could delegate certain, let's say, slides to them. We would just write a straw man on a paper and we would just send it over to them, and then overnight they would produce these for us. Or we had a team, I remember, in Sweden who would help us for certain visualizations. So there will be some teams who can definitely help you with that. So you could always find ways to delegate the work if needed. And the last point I want to make is that you should be more proactive when it comes to these things. So if you're unhappy with the work that you're currently doing, you can definitely let your manager know. And maybe your manager can allow you to take part in more storylining, more strategic discussions, which will definitely help you in your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there. I've also sort of been in a similar situation. I think the common one is, for example, transcribing interview notes from expert calls. I think that's one thing that most, if not all, would have done at some point in their careers. But I think you've got to keep your eye on the bigger picture. So you've got to focus on why it is that you're doing that particular task. And it's ultimately to help the client come out with an answer to a problem they have, right? It's always with a sort of goal in mind. At least I find that gives me the motivation to push through with, as you say, some of the more perhaps mundane tasks. And to be honest, there's also a maybe bigger question around, if it really is something that is not rewarding and not stimulating enough, then perhaps it could be that it just isn't the right job for that particular person. We just have to realize that sometimes it's not a job for everyone. Some might find it too challenging, some might not find it challenging enough. There's obviously a balance that needs to be struck.
Great, let's move on. Can anyone give me a referral in BCG? I don't think you should simply do that. You should at least put some more effort, because I can even read the comments. There is +1s. You cannot simply expect a manager or a consultant from those companies to reach back at you and then just message you and say, hey, yes, I'm going to provide you a referral. It's impossible. Here's what I suggest you can do. And by the way, we have a video about networking on our channel too, so feel free to check it out. But you just have to first really think about what are the main channels you could use for your referral strategy. So I would recommend first, obviously, friends and family. It definitely helps. The second thing is your university. Usually your career center would have a log of people who are already currently in consulting. And if you can just be more specific around who you want to speak with and from which firm and which location, they might be able to help you out. And third, as you would know, LinkedIn outreach or any other social media that you could think of. And for these, in that video, I detailed out what kind of messages that you could have, what kind of questions that you want to ask once they confirm that they are happy to spend 10-15 minutes. I'm sure many people reached out to you as well.
Yeah, no, they have, for sure. I think at the end of the day, you've got to put yourself in sort of the shoes of the consultant. The work involves late hours, and they're not going to be spending their time, researching who wants a referral on the internet. So you have to make it easier for them. And so in my experience, people that have, used some of the techniques that you've just described tend to react quite well, and they would be more than happy to help out. I think the important thing is to make sure that you come across as genuine and that you are more interested in knowing more about the firm, knowing about the culture, the types of projects, and just more generally learning about the environment rather than purely seeking out a referral link to try and boost your chances. At the end of the day, people you reach out to have to represent the company that you're applying to. And if they just see someone that isn't quite interested and is merely looking for an increase in the probability of getting an interview, then they might just turn you down.
Exactly. But also remember, usually those companies pay out bonuses once their referrals manage to get into the job. So there's always an incentive for them. It's just that you have to show that you're interested in the firm. All right, moving on. Is it true that it is competitive to get MBA sponsorship at BCG or Bain? I totally agree. It is very competitive. I remember that in my cohort, there were 8 applicants for MBA and only 2 of them were granted scholarship. So as you can imagine, it's quite competitive. So why is that? Let's talk about it. So first of all, those companies are spending $100,000, $200,000 for your education. And you can even argue if this is even necessary for the companies that they upskill you. So they have to be very selective. And at the same time, you have to be a top performer as well. So this means you have to belong to top 50% of performance to even be eligible. And then you would need to be joined to the pool of other applicants. Usually those offices don't make decisions on their own. They usually have other offices as well joining into that pool, and you're typically competing against tens of other candidates. And you really have to have a compelling story around why you need an MBA. So that's why you can't get a sponsorship right away. You shouldn't just assume that you're going to join MBB and you're just going to get a scholarship. I met tons of different colleagues that I had, and only a handful of them were able to get that. Also, we've just recently recorded a video cast where I've interviewed a BCG interviewer, and he was one of the few ones who managed to get an MBA scholarship. We plan to upload this video in a couple of weeks, so once it's uploaded, please go ahead and check it out. He's going to walk you through the entire process of how he managed to get his scholarship. You have any thoughts on that?
What you have to consider, I guess, is whether you would want that sponsorship in the first place. Being sponsored by one of the consulting firms comes with some strings attached in terms of having to stay for, and continue to work for that company for a few years. So it's definitely one thing to keep in mind that, even if you don't get the scholarship you want from your employer, there still obviously is the possibility of doing it independently. And actually that does give you more freedom in terms of whether you would want to go back to the employer or indeed choose a different path. And then I would argue also there's a bigger question around whether an MBA is needed as a consultant. I think a lot of people go and do an MBA in order to get into consulting. But if you are already in consulting, then perhaps the value of that is a little bit diminished, unless, of course, what you're looking to do is to perhaps change location and work somewhere else, or even sort of change industry completely, maybe pivot to private equity or venture capitalists, for example.
We already have another video on MBA as well. I've interviewed Ekrem, a former BCG consultant, now currently works at Google. And in that video, he walks us through why he had decided to do his MBA, but then he also recommends that it's not for everyone. So please check it out. Let's move on to the next question. What were the most difficult things that you had to learn as you joined consulting? What were the things that the company didn't tell you? I love that question. First of all, you should never start anything from scratch. What I mean by this is the following. Say that there's a new piece of analysis you need to do, you need to build a new model. You shouldn't just think about building the model from scratch and assuming what needs to be there. You have to ask other people to help you out. Or usually in those companies, there are internal documents. So for example, at BCG, there is something called Lab Learning at BCG. And this is an intranet where you could find hundreds of different documents in there and training materials. Please go through that. You don't need to do everything from scratch. The second point is that sometimes you can't really choose what you can work on, especially as you join a firm. So say that you're joining a firm of 50 people. This means they're not having a lot of different project types. So you may end up working on a project that they managed to sell, not necessarily something that aligns with your career aspirations. So at least for the first couple years, you may have to work on projects that you are not super excited about. But as you progress further, you will be able to get a chance to do some cross-office staffing if you feel like some practices are more popular in other regions. For example, Doa, another colleague who frequently features in our videos, he decided to do pricing as his specialization point. So because pricing wasn't very popular in the Turkish office, he ended up traveling to Italy, Qatar, and so on to do more of those projects. So you can take control of your career as you progress further. The last thing I want to talk about is office politics. So it's not something everyone talks about, but it is very important. Imagine that you don't know anyone and you just couldn't establish yourself well yet in the office. You may find it extremely tough to be able to get staffed on good projects or even to be chosen for certain extracurricular activities, the likes of recruiting, etc. So you really need to find your foothold as you enter the company. You need to invest time in socializing with people and finding the right people who can also help you out progress your career.
Yeah. One thing I didn't know going into the job is that actually the job changes quite a lot as you go through your career. So initially it tends to be a lot more about the quant skills and the harder skills around slide outputs and Excel modeling, etc. So you have to be a good doer, essentially, to be successful in your first kind of 2 or 3 years of your career. As you become a more senior consultant and maybe a manager, that then changes quite a bit and it becomes more about managing effectively, managing teams effectively. And that could mean a lot of different things. It could be knowing how and when to delegate tasks and not have to feel like you own everything yourself. It could mean effectively coming up with a style that allows you to manage effectively the junior consultants that you're now delegating the work to. So that's obviously very different. And to take the analogy even further, as you progress into the more senior levels, the likes of a director or principal, then it becomes much more about client relationships, selling project work, which is essentially a very different role to the previous two that I described. It's much more like a salesman almost.
Moving to the next question. I don't think this will concern everyone, but just so that you know, this person who posted this question, he applied for a job at McKinsey and he was rejected after the game. And he's asking if any of you contacted McKinsey and convinced them to reconsider. So I really like that question. It's something that I've gone through as well through my training network. First of all, when you apply to McKinsey, you're going to be receiving this game invite. But that game invite can be either sent to you after they review your resume and thinking that you're a good fit. But some offices do send it automatically within 1 to 2 days of your application. So it's a little hard for us to know whether you've received this invite automatically or not. So this means, say that you took the test and then you got rejected after that. They don't specifically tell you whether it's because you failed the game or that your overall candidacy was inadequate for a role at McKinsey. And they're not going to give you a specific feedback on this. But I have something interesting to tell you. So as I was training a cohort from INSEAD, I saw that a couple of my trainees were unable to get an interview invite from McKinsey. So usually you do state your 3 top choices for that company. After that, they realized that maybe there's a chance that they could apply to a McKinsey office from their home country. So we brainstormed together on what they could do. So I advised them to send an email to HR so that they could actually tell them that they've reconsidered and now they want to actually work at their own office. After that email exchanges, they were able to get the invite for the interviews, and actually 2 of them right now are working at McKinsey. So that example should show you that yes, usually you're unable to change their minds, but if you want to say change your office location, there might be a way for you to do this. Just give it a go and see what happens. You have nothing to lose.
Yeah, I think generally it is best practice to reach out whenever you get rejected from any application to try and get an understanding of what it is exactly that went wrong during that interview. So regardless of whether it's the test specifically or more broadly after a case interview or any other form of interview, it's always good to get the more detailed feedback. A lot of companies are happy to provide it. And it's a way to learn and make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes in future interviews.
I'll sidetrack a little bit now, but I've even seen in some circumstances where the first choice of the candidates rejected them, but then their second or third choices never received their resume. So sometimes if you feel like, okay, my first choice rejected me, but then you don't even know whether the second or third offices consider application, I always advise my trainees to email them just to make sure that they review their resume. All right, last question. I enjoy working from home, but felt increased pressure to come into office since a new partner joined, who expresses this is something he values and expects. What's your take on this? I quit consulting before COVID, so I guess I'm not the best person to answer that, but I'm sure you can say something.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, this is a very tricky one. Possibly there's no right or wrong answer, to be completely honest. But I think it's tricky because people will react differently to this situation, both the person that wants to be sort of working from home more and also the person that is sort of demanding the team to be in the office more. But I would say first thing first, the one thing you have to make sure is that you are complying with the firm's guidelines. So by now, most companies will have some guidance on how many days they would expect their consultants to be in the office or the most that they can be working from home. So the first thing is make sure you're following the advice, otherwise you sort of start on the wrong foot to begin with. And then I would say it's really case by case. I've also had experience with directors and partners who have a very strong preference for having teams in the office for better collaboration and just generally better working environment and fostering that culture. Equally, I've also sort of seen partners and directors who are less interested in that and purely focus on sort of the output. And as long as the team is delivering, it doesn't necessarily matter where they're delivering from, whether it's home or the office. At the end of the day, there has to be some sort of a compromise if indeed there are very strong opposing views, right? If the person wants to work from home and if the director or partner is demanding that person to work from the office, there might be some form of a compromise, which is kind of a middle ground for both.
And how was your experience like? Because I'm sure that you've gone through this process. So did you feel guilty of not coming to the office?
So personally, I do tend to think that it's more effective and efficient to work from the office when you have a very busy project. So I do tend to go in at least sort of Monday to Thursday when I'm on a busy case. But I'm also equally flexible and I'm happy to let my teams work from wherever. I really don't have a preference. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to work remotely and to jump into a call with someone. But yes, I have been with directors and bosses who have maybe questioned when someone wasn't in the office and wondered where they were and why they weren't there, which is always a little bit awkward, especially given you are allowed to do that. But it's one to tread very lightly. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't want to displease someone who you might be working with multiple times. It's certainly not wise to sort of clash very strongly with someone that might even dictate your promotion outcome or your bonus outcome. So it's one to definitely send out some feelers for and make sure you're on the same page before something happens. I would say definitely not try to put your foot down and stick to it. Try and come with some sort of a compromise to make both people happy.
I agree. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. This was an interesting and a little unusual video on our end, but if you like it, please go ahead and like this video so that we know whether we need to produce more of these videos in the future. And thanks a lot for your time, Lorenzo.
No worries. Thank you.
Take care.